Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I have the pleasure of talking with David Gammel today, Executive Director at AAPM. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Lucas. Really glad to be here.
Oh, our pleasure. Well, our wonderful world of acronyms, I intentionally introduced AAPM. I want to give you the opportunity to tell a little bit about what AAPM is all about, your current role there, and then we'll back into the backstory, how David found his way into associations.
Okay, great. Yeah, so AAPM, that stands for the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, otherwise known as medical physicists. And these are folks that have all their education and training is in physics, but they work in medical settings. So the biggest areas that they tend to show up in are like radiation oncology for the treatment of cancer. Diagnostic imaging is another big area. So all the different tools that are used for imaging of our bodies to understand what's going on in there and help the doctors understand what's happening so they can develop appropriate treatments and approaches. Nuclear medicine is another area of that, which can be used in a lot of different ways, sometimes in oncology, sometimes in other therapies. And then they're also tend to do a lot. They're either like fully in the clinical setting, or some have joint academic clinical appointments, or are full academic where they're just primarily doing research. And one of the things I really like about these folks, as I'm getting to know them, I just started in January this year, is that they take this stuff that's really pretty theoretical and then figure out how to apply it in a medical setting to improve safety, improve health outcomes. So that's kind of one of the things working with associations through my career we'll get into that I really like a lot is folks who take something very fundamental in terms of discoveries and figure out how to do good things with it in the world.
Yeah, I consider myself sort of a problem solver. I kind of nerd out on that stuff. And while I don't have a background, I started out many moons ago as pre-med because I was fascinated by the sciences. It doesn't make me necessarily any better in my role today, but I do I do very much appreciate that industry and that there are very, very smart individuals that are working on stuff that growing up I thought it was only on the Jetsons. So.
Yeah, no, a lot of it. Some of it actually looks like Star Trek when
Yeah.
you go see these tools and devices.
It's great. We've come a long way. I mean, I have some personal medical history that has been overcome by the advancements of such medicine. So I have a personal tie to this conversation. I think in that industry, I think it's really, really fascinating. Is that your background, David? Do you have a medical background or?
Not at all. My undergraduate degree was in international studies. So it was an interdisciplinary degree. So I had a little bit of everything across liberal arts. And my master's in international communication, which is kind of similar. And I was focused there on like how. Well, I used to work for the Employee Relocation Council, and I really got interested in the international side of the business. And when I was getting that degree, I was digging into how to prepare people for international business assignments. And I was thinking of going into that business after getting the degree, but ended up sticking with associations after all. So I have nothing to do with medicine other than being the beneficiary of it many times. So it's been a fun deep dive for me to learn this field.
I've noticed in my seat, though, there does seem to be, I'm taking some broad strokes as we've done, a lot of episodes here on the show, but communication seems to be a big aspect. And so international communications and studies, that is one of the key drivers I found just personally in leadership and being able to communicate whatever the value prop is that it is that you're trying to communicate for, whether it be an event, whether it be a membership. So I think you've got the right feather in your cap, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah. I've really come to believe like storytelling is just critical to getting anything done. Like budgets are a story, budgets tell the story of where we are now financially, where we're planning to go, how we're allocating our resources for it. But you think it's pretty dry. It's just spreadsheets, balance sheets, a bunch of numbers. But especially when you're working with volunteers who, with your finance committee and your boards, that you have to be able to communicate the story of what this is saying and what's our journey going forward and how do these numbers contribute to that, and then you can get things done. But people have to understand the story behind it, or it's difficult for them to get behind it.
Well, and you have to tell the story almost through three different perspectives, right? So you have a board, which is one story. You have a membership, which is another version of the story. It's not a different story, right? But it is a different way you tell it. And then you have staff, which is sort of somewhere in between, and how each look at those is unique.
Yes, and you've put your finger on it. I mean, that is it. Like you build a story and an approach with staff. You do the same with your board. You do another version with your officers, and then you've got to communicate all of that to the full membership. And it's always two way. It's not just telling people stuff. It really starts with listening, and then framing things up for them, and then kind of co-creating the story together. But there are different versions of it with all those different groups, and that's, I think, with the role I have, it's like one of the challenging parts is kind of making sure all those stories are fairly consistent and are all pulling in the same direction. And that's the fun part of it. That's also the hard part.
Yeah, three. Again, I'm gonna not call it three different stories, three different perspectives, but heading in the same
Right.
direction.
It's like the novel, the audiobook, and like the Cliff's Notes. Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
all,
There you go.
it's all
We
the
won't
same stuff.
assign which one's which based on those three because there could be a
Mhm.
negative connotation with Cliff Notes. At least there was back in my day.
Yeah.
I got my hand slapped a few times for using Cliff Notes on things, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us. Let's go back in time. How did you make your way in? Because you've sort of bounced around in this industry
Mhm.
a little bit, which we talk about in a few minutes. But how did you originally find associations?
I moved to DC right after undergrad from Ohio, and my college girlfriend at the time had landed a job here doing something called policy, which I didn't really know what that was, but sounded real. And I was working at a bookstore in Cleveland, so I said, "All
Yeah.
right, well, how about I come out there?" And started temping, and worked at a couple of different associations and mailrooms, and then landed a job in a meetings department at the Employee Relocation Council, as it was called back then.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been '93. And I figured I'd find my career eventually. Didn't think that was it, and that actually turned out to be it. So pretty much, first couple of weeks I found it, but it took me a little while to sort of accept it and see the opportunities in the field. But I've either been working for or with associations pretty much right out of college.
Ah, the mailrooms, a thing of the past,
Yeah,
maybe.
I know. It doesn't. My first two or three jobs like literally don't exist anymore. They've gone away due to
Yeah,
technology.
my grandfather was the executive director for the Direct Mail Association, and they no longer exist. The one
Hmm.
that he led many years ago, that's gone away. But I remember even sort of getting into it when I was doing sales, but a portion of it was still, hey, we're going to mail people value props and understanding. And so
Yeah,
we'd
yeah.
have these like stuffing parties, what we'd call them, because they were
Hmm.
smaller audience sort of direct mail communications, and I thought it was a lot of fun. But now everything's digital.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time typing faxes into computers and then compiling physical board books for the board meetings at ERC back in the day.
Yeah,
So,
we had a dot matrix printer at the end of the aisle, right? It would zip,
yeah,
zip, zip, and then somebody would rip it off, and then we'd run down and
hmm,
manually type things in. Thankfully,
yeah,
we've gotten some technology in the association space. Some would say we're still 10 years behind, but we're catching up maybe.
yeah. I think so.
Well, what's that got you in? You followed the girlfriend. I have a similar story. I share with you before the show. I followed my now wife up to Northern Virginia for
Hmm.
that's where she was. And
Yeah,
what sort of kept you in it all these years?
yeah. So the girlfriend and I broke up right after I got the job. So still friends. So she's great,
That's
but that
good.
didn't work out. But yeah, I stuck with that organization for about, gosh, 7 or 8 years, and they just constantly gave me new opportunities to grow. So I had probably 4 or 5 different jobs there during my time with them, and kind of moved my way up. And I'm always so thankful to them. Chris Colley was the executive vice president or executive director of that organization, and just I was so lucky to land there right off the bat. He's a great leader. He's been retired for a while now, but I just learned a ton from him and his team there. So that really is probably why I stayed with the industry ultimately, was that experience. So later in the 90s, the internet was coming along, and I helped
Mhm.
develop a lot of the content for ERC's first website.
Hmm.
I was running, doing stuff on our international programs, and like literally the day our website went up with my email address and that I was identified as international, I started getting contacts from people all over the world looking for help to move to the United States,
Wow.
which really wasn't what we did. I would respond to them and say, we don't actually move anyone. We just sort of talk about it, but here's some resources you could go look at. But it really blew my mind that after this went up, I was just hearing from people all over the world who found us somehow.
It's
So I
incredible.
got interested in the web and web technologies, and basically bootstrapped my knowledge of that, and landed a job with the American Speech Language Hearing Association in, gosh, 2000, and
Hmm.
joined them as a director of web and knowledge strategy. So they had not a brochure website, but a pretty basic website at that time. And the
Yeah.
organization had made a commitment to really invest in it and make it a primary channel for providing value to members. So I built a team there, worked with some great colleagues at ASHA for a number of years, launching that website, relaunching it, and basically taking all the services of the organization online one way or another,
Yeah.
one at a time. So those were fun times. And I worked with Mike Guerreri, who's the director of information systems there,
Hmm.
and he's now with Delcor. But Mike and I had a great time partnering together to get all that stuff online.
Yeah, we launched websites back then, and then we relaunched them, and then
Yeah.
the mobile device came along, so then we had to redo the websites again, right?
Yep.
Because they had to be optimized for mobile, and things have
Yeah.
changed quite a bit. But
Yeah. Never ending work.
no,
And
it's good. It's a living, breathing thing. It keeps
it
everybody
is.
working.
So coming out of there, I decided to try my hand at being a solo consultant. So I left ASHA voluntarily and started my own solo consulting business. I was growing up. My parents were consultants. My
Hmm.
dad and my stepmom and a number of my siblings were. So it's kind of like being
Okay.
raised by wolves in some ways. But I decided I wanted to try my hand at that, and I was really excited about helping organizations to kind of connect their top level strategy to what was going on online. So whatever they're trying to pursue as an organization, let's figure out how their website and other technologies could contribute to that, which was kind of novel at the time. People were just
Yeah.
sort of doing cookie cutter stuff. So did that for a number of years until we ran into the global financial crisis, and web strategy became fairly optional at that point. So things got a little lean as a solo consultant, and I'd always had in the back of my mind to take on a role like I have now. And I happened across a search for the Entomological Society of America, looking for the next executive director, and threw my hat in. And one thing led to another, and they ended up hiring me at the end of that process. So I spent about 9 years at ESA
Hmm.
with that organization. I'm always so thankful to them. Like, it was a great opportunity for me at the time, and I learned so much. And to what you and I were talking about earlier, like before we started, consulting just teaches you how to rapidly diagnose situations, understand what's going on, and then think about what could be done to address it, either taking advantage of opportunities or resolving some issues or challenges that are going on. And that's really and doing that with stakeholders that you can't boss around or tell what to do. You're advising them. So that's pretty much executive director land too. You're
Yeah.
working with a board that you cannot tell what to do. You're helping them understand the world they're in and how things are going and what the possibilities are and what changes should happen. And then it's the same with the staff. I mean, you could order staff to do stuff, but really it's better if they're inherently motivated to pursue this in partnership with you. So you have to convince them of where are we going, what's this vision, and convey that to them so they can execute against it and support them while they do it. And that's basically consulting in a
Yeah.
different setting. So prepared me a lot for that job.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, it's somewhat unique in that the typical course seemed to be you go with the association and then turn consultant ladder in the
Mm-hmm.
career and take what you've learned to be that strategic advisor, and you've taken an approach to go a little bit more back and forth, and I think that provides one just a great perspective on other challenges that are out there, and strategically, sort of a non-industry executive or not from industry specific gives you a good way of thinking about the strategy all the way through to execution. You get sort of a broader horizon of insights. And I would imagine it would give you in your current role maybe a different perspective on consulting to the industry. I mean, how you look at consultants now may be different from somebody who's been a career executive on the association side of the fence. Is that fair?
Yeah, it probably makes me a terrible client in some ways because I know too much.
How
But
so? How so?
oh well, consulting's a business, so I think really, and when we'll talk about this soon, but I came here to AAPM from McKinley Advisors, where I was a chief practice officer, and we had clients that were quite experienced working with consultants and
Hmm.
really knew how to do that partnership and consume what the advice you provided to them and execute against it. Those
Yeah.
were always really great projects because we could get stuff done and apply it and help them be successful. Organizations where they're not as familiar with working with consultants, I think it's a skill to develop as an executive is how to hire consultants, understand what they can contribute, what they can't, and how to best make use of what they provide to you. No one's a magic wand that'll fix everything. So I think it is a skill set to develop. You don't have to be a consultant to get that, but it is something you could learn and develop. And sometimes just asking the consultants when you're, talking with them about a possible project is like, well, for your clients who are most successful in working with you, what do they typically do? How do they engage with you? Ask questions like that,
That's
and
great.
they'll tell you exactly how you can best get value from
Well, how do you? Well, let's just pull on this thread a little bit more because now you got me sparked on the curiosity side.
it.
From your perspective, is there seems to be on the vendor side, there's always a sort of an RFP, eye roll, exhaust. Somebody, there's got to be a better way. It's like when you try to get out of an airplane, it's like, oh, this is the worst. Like there's got to be a better way to do this. That's what I always
Yeah.
tell myself. Um, what sort of advice or other things do you see that could sort of fix that process? Or I think those were great questions by
Yeah.
that you just proposed that you're asking on the front end. What other advice would you have to other executives that are out there looking for the right consultant?
Yeah, I think getting multiple bids and conversations is usually a good thing to do, just for comparison's sake, and to see what they bring to the table. With RFPs, I think the main thing is you don't want to be too prescriptive on the solution, like at all. I think you want to be very clear about what your goals and objectives are for the project, what you're hoping to do, what you hope will be better at the end of it, and convey that clearly to everyone you're talking to. Um, but then give them the freedom to propose their solution that they think will best address that. I've seen a lot of RFPs in my career and on both sides, and the ones that are tough to work with and really probably don't lead to the best results are where the association, using that as our sort of example or starting point, if they're too prescriptive about what they want, like we want you to do X, Y, and Z, and 1, 2, 3 order, you know, just have your staff do it. You want to work, if you're hiring a consultant, it's because they've got some smarts and experience and knowledge,
Right.
and approaches that are better than what you've got. And they've got the capacity to really focus on you and develop that for you. So I think as you explore that, you would just really want to give them the space to offer you their best possible solution, so that you can benefit from it.
Yeah, there's I guess there's now a famous Steve Jobs quote notion of, hiring great people and then getting out of their way. Don't tell great people what to do, let them
Hmm.
figure it out on their own sort of notion. What I'm hearing is do the same with consultants. Here's the problem, how would you fix it? And how would you approach it and let
Yeah.
them act under their own style? I personally feel the same way about staff is, I think there are people that are very gifted in specific roles, but nobody's gifted at every role. I mean, I could raise my hand
Hmm.
and point to myself in that as well. There are things that I do really well at, other things. But if somebody gave me the instruction manual and all I had to do was follow it, then I'm not using any of my own gifts, right? My own experience, which is, I think, what a lot of people talk to as part of diversity, in a way, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's with delegation. Like this is really what this is too, is delegation. And when I'm coaching staff on delegation, that's often the biggest challenge or thing I work with them on and getting comfortable with is like, look, they're going to get there differently than you would have, and that's okay. You need to set guardrails like within this playing field. You can do what you need to do to get there and be successful, and I'll support you in doing it. And then you, as the person who gave them that project or work to do, have to shut up and let them run with it and be there as a resource. Because if you tell them exactly how to do it, beyond training, once they're prepared and ready, you need to give them that freedom so they can find their way that's going to work best for them, and they'll probably find some creative things that you wouldn't have thought of. And I think with consultants, same, but you do need to, stay engaged and with them and make sure it's heading in the right direction throughout the project.
Yeah, similar though. I think that's fascinating. The idea that you're training on delegation. I think that is a muscle that has to be worked.
Hmm.
You need to, it doesn't necessarily come naturally for everybody, especially those that want to sort of keep their, hands around things, want to keep their finger on the pulse, whatever silly metaphor you want to use for being overbearing or, or
Hmm.
micromanaging. But,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about how that works within your own framework on sort of training people to delegate.
Well, it's a big transition in everyone's career. Like if you kind of come up through the ranks over time, which is how
Hmm.
most people do it, you shift from being the doer to being the person that's supporting those that are doing things. And whenever you move to doing something new, it feels uncomfortable. So often when people feel uncomfortable, they try to get more control, which is an illusion,
Yeah.
basically, in everything.
You end up
So
with more
that's
to
where
do.
I see,
Yeah.
folks coming into management for the first time, kind of hitting problems is with that. So It's a lot of coaching. There's a lot of training and, good content out there on how to delegate. So this is like I won't say a solved problem, but there's a lot of really good literature and approaches on how to do this. So with a little self-education and some training, you can find the approaches that'll work well for you. Also, it's kind of with every report, you have to kind of negotiate that with them, or at least I do. I just say, like, how can I best support you? Like, here's how I typically show up. That may or may not be the best fit for you. What do you want? What are you hoping for? What do you definitely not want for me, so I can avoid that and negotiate that. So I've been having a lot of those conversations here at 8 p.m. as I've been coming on board.
I think that's great. I mean, so if anybody out there is looking for a great role where you can learn about delegation and there's an opening at 8 p.m., I think you know where to go now.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, what about if you're open to it, David, a mistake along this journey on the association side, on the consulting side? You have something that stands out, and again, sanitize it as much as you need to for the sake of whoever might have been involved, but other than yourself.
Well, one I've been thinking about recently was at a prior organization I was at, and there was a program that was named for a scientist who's kind of historic back in time, but had some really problematic theories that he developed that are racist, basically. So he had done a lot of really important foundational work in the discipline, but also had that stuff as part of who he was and his package. And this program was named for him. And we had some feedback from students at the time that let's change that name of this. And what I would have done now, looking back, was just had the conversation we needed to have and then changed the name because they were right. What we did instead was put a whole process of having a very broad dialogue. There are also split camps about changing the name, which not cleanly, but often split down generational differences. There are folks really proud of the tradition and history. Others, who were focusing more on just the impact this has on people coming through the program today. And so this process we went through kind of came up with a hybrid solution that didn't really satisfy anyone, but ultimately kept the name in place. And then after a few years later, the name changed anyways. So, which is what we should have done in the first place. So for me, looking back, just having that clarity on an issue like that of really the right thing to do is to change the name, and we don't need to drag everyone through this process. That's going to disappoint everyone. I don't know that we could have. Well, I didn't get to that answer at the time, so I just maybe had to have that experience to understand that one. Well, that's one in particular. So it didn't cause any economic damage to the organization. Took up a lot of time though, and a lot of conversation, and certainly burned some political capital.
Yeah, well said. I think that's that's a difficult situation, and you've seen that played out. I mean, that's a very relevant topic today, and the naming of buildings here in the DC area, and statues, monuments, that is getting a lot of attention, as it should. And I think sometimes you just have to make the decision. You can't please everybody; it won't happen. And that's a good one. Yeah. What about something, David? Beginning of the year, Jan 1, is there something you look forward to each year that gets you excited? It's definitely on the calendar, personal, professional.
Well, this year was starting this job on January 2. So that was a big one for 2024. In general, I think, associations are cyclical. Like, we do the same stuff year after year in a lot of ways, like the same patterns. And so I've learned over the years that you really have to think about it as a system. So for me, January 1, it's about, have we put the things in motion that we need to have happening to shift our system so that we're going to achieve the goals we have set out for ourselves? Because if we haven't, we need to get on that. Because if you don't, you're probably just going to do what you did last year over again, with some variations. But if you need to make big changes, associations are complex systems.
Yeah.
With, it's like a conglomerate of small businesses with a consensus-based governance model on top, which if you were just inventing something, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
You wouldn't do it that way.
No, you wouldn't. But I believe in associations and the value we bring to society. So the model, works in a lot of ways. But because it is that, you do have to think about the whole year. You have to think about multiple years. And for bigger stuff, what's the change we're trying to drive? How do we move that through our cycle each year so we really progress on it? So it takes patience. It takes some longer term vision and some strategy to kind of move those things forward.
Yeah. There's general generally different philosophies about moving into your role, as you just did earlier
Hmm.
this year, on change, right? Tell us a little bit about your philosophy when you go in. Are there areas that you typically look at and start with, as you've done this a couple of times now, and maybe learn some things, that there's areas to start with that are going to have more impact in the short term versus long term? And
Hmm.
is it sort of a wait and evaluate period, or are there things that you want to jump in on right away?
John Graham, who's a former CEO of ASA and passed away a few years ago, he always used
Yeah.
to say, if you've seen one association, you've seen one association.
Yeah.
So while they're all very similar in a lot of ways, they all are very unique, and especially when it comes to kind of governance and leadership, and how the staff culture, the volunteer culture, those are pretty significant variables. So
Mm-hmm.
I think coming into a new organization, I really tried hard to understand where they are, and then meet them there, like go there with them, and then talk about how can we move things forward from here. Because if you try to jump ahead too far or in a very different place than they all are, you're going to fail. You're just going to be banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of kind of driving like best practice change, for its own sake, but just really looking at, what's going really well here and how can we do more of that. Doing a lot of listening when you come in. Where are the pain points? Say, well, gosh, if we change this, would it break something else? Is this going to solve a lot of your issues? And you can find some of those, easy wins early on for staff and members, or you can make some initial tweaks and begin to identify the bigger rocks that need to be moved over time. But you have to listen. I think you have to be very transparent and honest, and kind at the same time,
Yeah.
about things. Like, here's a situation as I see it. Does this resonate with you? Does it make sense? What are your thoughts and reflections on that? Have that conversation 1,000 times, and start to build that story. What's the story of change for us? Why is it going to be good for everybody? Why is it imperative to change some things now versus not? So I don't know if that's like a blueprint, but it's more of almost a philosophical approach, maybe to how to
That's
enter
good.
the
I mean, that's
organization. But
that's that's more detailed than I feel like, tongue in cheek, the traditional consultant would say, it depends,
mm,
right? So,
yes, well, yeah. So that's the short version.
but I think it ties back to our earlier conversation around the storytelling, which I appreciate. You rounded that directly back in. Was you have to understand the folks that are the characters in the story, what's happened previously, in
Mhm.
order to be able to build the right story moving forward. And I think that's absolutely right. I've seen some folks come into organizations and just immediately try to put their stamp on things, and it often doesn't work out,
Yeah.
either from an execution standpoint on the program or initiative, or there's a negative impact to culture, which I appreciate you going in and sort of leading your answer with understanding who they are and what's working, and really listening. I
Yeah.
think that's the
It
right
depends
approach.
too. Like, if the organization's in dire straits, like there's a financial crisis going on, like if there's something that magnitude going on, then you might move a lot faster to change some things and some pretty big things. But absent that, I think it pays to take your time, get your feet on the ground, and really understand the lay of the land. And then change will happen faster than you expected, because you'll find the opportunities to do it. But you really have to do that listening. But there are cases I've seen execs come in where it's nine alarm fire, and then they're usually empowered by the board and the volunteers to really move some stuff because it has to happen right away.
So as a consultant, I'm sure you've been brought in. It seems like too often the consultants are brought in at the time that it is dire straits. The ship is sinking. Help us
Hmm.
bail the water and get us back afloat. I mean, do you enjoy those situations, or? Because
Well,
I know some that do. I know they're not
yeah,
ambulance chasers; they're rescuers, right? And
yeah.
that's their niche. They enjoy that sort of, I want to
Hmm.
fix it and repair it. And there's others that just say, I really enjoy the strategy portion of it, but not such a 5 alarm fire, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, like, first do no harm, like that applies. Like, you need to be there to help them, and to be honest about that when there are really challenging situations going on. And sometimes, like, if it's with the CEO or the executive director, like, you can, it is a lonely job in some ways where, it's hard to share stuff. So often, if you're working at that level of the organization,
Yeah.
you can be a safe place for them to share stuff that they're not able to share with their volunteer leaders or their
Hmm.
staff, and talk through things with you. And when they're in an acute situation, that can be really valuable for them. It just helps them process and get to where they need to go. But yeah, no, it's always good to work on big things. I love the generative stuff. That's really positive. But if they've got a crisis going on or challenge, then there's a lot of value to be delivered there. And then often the stakes are a little higher for that too. Like you really need to help them take care of whatever this is. So you really have to show up with your A game.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, personally, I prefer the bigger, more complicated stuff, and but
Yeah.
it's all interesting. Well, something on a lighter note. What's something about David that we couldn't find on the resume or the internet? We can find you on LinkedIn for sure. You're pretty
hmm
active there, and I enjoy watching the travels, and you do a great job of building up the team and talking about AAPM. And what's something we couldn't find there?
Well, a few people know this, especially my Facebook friends, which is a little overlap with the association rule, but not total. Is like I built a boat. I like to make art, although I haven't really had time to do much of that at all this year with this switch and coming on board at AAPM. But I like to do some painting and photography, just things that let me occupy my brain and kind of get it focused on something else other than work. Because just the way my brain works, I'm typically thinking about work most of the time or my family. But when I'm doing a complicated physical project of some sort, that just allows my brain to chew on something else for a while, which I find refreshing.
Absolutely. All right. So you built a boat. Is this a boat you still have? It floats. It goes.
The boat floats. Yeah, it's a 15-foot double-ended rowboat, and I built the sailing kit for it too. So I've got it down at Kentucky Lake, where in Western Kentucky, where I've gone pretty much every summer of my life, and sailed around down there.
That sounds fabulous. Well, we'll post a picture of the boat if you're open to it with the episode.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I'm a big fan of hobbies and getting yourself outside. I've been a lifelong basketball player and started coaching my kids when they were younger, and that's my place of solitude, if you will. Kind of remove the mind from the work stuff and
Yeah,
partly live vicariously through them, if I'm being really honest with myself and the audience
sure.
here. But I enjoy the sport, so you got to have those things.
Definitely.
Well, David, thank you so much for the time, as I have the unfortunate pleasure of wrapping up our episodes. But I would love to ask you if you have somebody in your network you think our audience would benefit from hearing from.
Yeah, I wanted to recommend Seth Kahn, who's with Visionary Leadership. It's his own firm, solo consultant, but he focuses on doing grand challenge projects with associations, so really
Hmm.
big projects. So he's done some really great stuff like the American Nurses Association with CFP Board. And right now he's partnered with the Huntsman Mental Health Foundation to leading a big project on destigmatizing mental health and addiction. So people are able to get treatment
It's great
and
work.
feel more comfortable with it. So, but he just, with his work with associations, he's like, what's the biggest problem in your space? And then he helps them tackle it. And by their space, like not their operations, but like for the whole field they represent or industry or
Bigger,
discipline.
longer term things. He wants
Yeah,
to just put his hands around the elephant and try to tackle it.
that's right. And he's a great guy. I've known him for 20 years. And I think he'd be a great interview for you.
That sounds excellent. I mean, personally and professionally, I'd like to meet him. So thank you
Yeah.
for that. And thank you again, David, for the time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lucas.